All right. In Mark chapter 2, we have, and I should give kudos to Mark. He's the only gospel we've skipped, right? And you can get an inferiority complex if you're Mark, because here has been this nice class of people who haven't taken a second to look at you when they've looked at all your neighbors' houses, right? And so we gotta give a little dignity to Mark, because Mark doesn't do incarnation at the same level or in the same way as Matthew, Luke, and John, but he intimates it, right? Both through the term Son of God, but also even directly with this character doing things that only God can do. And that's clearest in Mark chapter 2. And I'm not going to read the whole thing because we don't have time, but you can read it as I talk. In that setting, it's the famous passage where Jesus heals a man who is paralyzed. His buddies bring him on a stretcher and set him down in front of Jesus, but they don't do it in the normal way of coming through the door because it's too crowded to get through the door. So instead, they climb on the roof, cut their way through the roof, and lower the guy down. It's pretty spectacular. Once he gets there, Jesus says, my son, your sins are forgiven, right? So this poor guy who can't walk has heard about this healer, and he's laid down spectacularly in front of the healer, and the healer says, okay, your sins are forgiven. I gotta think he's slightly disappointed. He probably didn't come with the notion that he wanted to do a confession or a forgiveness of sins. He probably had heard this guy might fix your legs, right? But Jesus starts with your sins are forgiven. And if you remember the story at all, you remember that the scribes begin to grumble. The Jewish leaders who are especially keen on law and the Torah start to grumble, and they say, hey, who is this guy? Only God alone can forgive sins, right? And then Jesus squares off with them, and ultimately the guy gets both sins forgiven and his limbs healed, and he's off and running, right? But there in that mix is Mark's Jesus interacting with people who say he's doing things only God can do. Later in that chapter, at the end of chapter 2, his disciples are interrupted because they're picking grain on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees jump out and say, aha, we caught you. And when they catch the disciples picking grain on the Sabbath, Jesus defends them and says, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath, right? Using Lord language is a clue, right? Then in chapter 4, Jesus takes the disciples out on the lake, and they're in a famous scene. They're out there, and a storm comes up, and it's a terrifying storm, and the disciples are losing it, and Jesus is sleeping in the bow, and they say, Master, save us. Aren't you worried that we're going to drown? And he calms the storm, right? Control over weather is another clue. Right? Control over weather is another clue. Some of us think we can do that, but we aren't really doing it, just to dispel your delusions of grandeur. You really can't change weather. God has that power and prerogative. So Mark has 3 or 4 places where he has Jesus do God-like things. He never says anything like the Word became flesh or Jesus existed before all time or anything like that. But he does intimate a divinity in Jesus. And so it's an intimation of incarnation, right?